Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be discussing the fourth verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. Before I start, I just want to say something. That is, I have been writing a series of explanations of each of these verses. These talks I have been giving in each of the meetings are based on what I've been writing. I haven't quite finished what my explanation of this fourth verse. It's almost finished, but I haven't read through fully what I've written, and I may have to revise it, and some more ideas may come. I think it's because of the speed of my progress, the very slow speed of my progress. I doubt whether I will be able to write enough on the fifth verse before our next meeting. So if I'm not able to, if I haven't yet gathered enough ideas before the next meeting for the fifth verse, I will probably postpone talking about the fifth verse till the second meeting in November. In which case, at the next meeting, I will just answer questions. And the reason I don't want to rush what I'm doing, because for me, writing about Bhagavan's verses, it's a form of manana. It's a type of meditation, we can say. And I can't just sit down and write. When I start to write, I don't know what ideas are going to come. And while writing this explanation for the fourth verse, I've been writing it for 2 weeks now, and still Bhagavan is giving ideas, and when I add more, so it's a slow progress. It's not something that I can rush, and in a way, I feel it's not really me who's doing it. Bhagavan is giving me ideas one by one, making things clear as I just think about it. So as I say, I don't want to rush it. So if I'm not able to to gather enough ideas before the next meeting, I will postpone talking about the fifth verse till the following meeting. So I just wanted to give some forewarning about that. So now I'll begin to talk about this this verse. First, let me first get the. No, wait a second. What Bhagavan says in this verse is, well, I'll first read the verse. Irundoli une vida tadu tirul devam, irutene vilakedu, tadu tidul lehan. Irundoli une ari burutidil Tida Kendre, Irutane Matum Dorum Vida Vuruvai. Irundoli une Ari Hill Enil Anno, Iravian Ari Vuru Kurudara Yava. Irundoli irundara enatula tondrai ineyarum maruna malayenum maniye. The meaning of this verse is, the literal meaning is, see, seeking God, leaving you, who exist and shine, is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. Only to make yourself, who exist and shine, known, you have been as various forms in each creed. If there are those who do not know you, who exist and shine, such people are just blind people without knowledge of the sun. Gem called the peerless great Aruna hill, exist and shine in my heart as one without a second. That's the basic meaning. I'll just go through the sentence one by one and slightly expand. The first sentence, Irundoli une vidatu adu titel devam, irutine vilakedu adu tidalekan. That means seeking God, leaving you, who exist and shine, is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. What that implies is seeking God while leaving or letting go, forsaking, neglecting you, who exist and shine. Exist and shine implies exist and shine eternally in one's heart as pure being awareness, that chit, I am, which is God as he actually is just like seeking darkness, taking a lamp. And then the second line, Irundole une arivu urutidaku endre, irritane matum dorum vida vuruvai. Only to make yourself, who exist and shine, known, you have been as various forms in every creed. I think that's quite self-explanatory. Irundoli une arihila enil, anno irevin arivaru kurudar e ava. If there are people who do not know you, who exist and shine, such people are just blind people without knowledge of the sun. The implication here, if there are those who do not know you, who exist and shine as the light that illumines the mind, enabling it to know other things, such people are just like blind people without knowledge of the sun. And finally, in the final line, this is the only prayer in Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. So he ends his verse with a prayer. Irundoli, irundara, enadu ulatu ondrai, ineyarum aruna ma malayenum maniye. That means gem called the peerless great Aruna hill. That gem there implies the gem of pure awareness. Exist and shine in my heart as one without a second. So now I'll begin to explain this in more detail. I won't read all of the explanation I've written, but I'll take the main points from what I've written. Firstly, in the first section, I explain about the phrase irundoli, which every line of this verse begins with the words irundoli. That's a phrase that consists of two verbs, irundu and oli. Irundu is a adverbial participle that means being, existing, or remaining. And oli is the root of a verb that means shine. In each of the first three lines, oli is used as an adjectival participle, meaning shiny or who shines, whereas in the final line, it is used as in an imperative sense, shine. In a Tamil sentence, there's only one main verb, and likewise in a relative clause, there can only be one adjectival participle. So in either case, any other verbs become adverbial participles. Therefore, an English sentence such as he sat down and eat would be expressed in Tamil as sitting down he ate. And a relative clause such as who sat down and ate would be expressed as who sitting down ate. Therefore, in each of the first three lines of this verse, irundoli is an adjectival clause that literally means who being shines, who existing shines, or who remaining shines, but that implies who is and shines, who exists and shines, who remains and shines. And in the final line, it's an imperative clause that means being shine, existing shine, or remaining shine, but that implies be and shine, exist and shine, or remain and shine. In each of the first three lines, the adjectival clause irundole describes unne, a poetic, which means is an accusative form of you, referring here to Aruṇācala. So irundole une means you who are or exist or remain and shine, thereby implying that Aruṇācala is what actually is, what actually exists and therefore remains eternally, and what shines. In other words, this adjectival clause implies that Aruṇācala is actually pure being, Sat, which shines as pure awareness, Chit. So in this verse, Bhagavan is emphasizing that the real nature, Swarupa, of Aruṇācala is pure being awareness, Sat Chit, which is the fundamental reality underlying the appearance of all particular things, the ground on which they appear and the source from which they appear, and the ultimate substance of which they are composed. Since nothing can be other than being, and since nothing can appear except in awareness, pure being awareness is ananta, endless, limitless, boundless, infinite, and therefore one only without a second, ekam eva advitiyam. So when he prays in the final line of this verse, irundoli irandu ara enadu ulatu ondrai, be and shine in my heart as one without a second. In effect, he is teaching us to pray to Aruṇācala to reveal itself to us in our heart as it always actually is, namely as the one infinite and otherless being awareness, Sat Chit. Though Aruṇācala always exists and shines in our heart as our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am, we do not know it as it actually is, because instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we're now aware of ourselves as I am this body. Since this body is not what we actually are, the awareness I am this body is a false awareness of ourself. And what is aware of itself as I am this body is not ourself as we actually are, but only ourself as ego. That is, it is only when we seem to have risen as ego, namely in waking and dream, that we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. And because we do not rise as ego, and because when we do not rise as ego, as in sleep or any other state of manolaya, temporary dissolution of mind, we're aware of nothing other than our own being, I am. Whatever we mistake ourselves to be is called an upadi, a term that is often translated as adjunct or limiting adjunct, but that more precisely means a disguise, a false identity, deceptive appearance, distinguishing attribute, superimposed limitation, or fraudulent substitute, particularly in the sense of a secondary thing that a primary thing is mistaken to be, such as the snake that a rope is mistaken to be. So in the false awareness, I am this body is an upadi, whereas I am is the underlying reality. Since Aruṇācala, or God, is our very being, it is only our false identification with a set of upadis that makes us seem to be other than him, as Bhagavan points out in verse 24 of Updesha Undiyya, in which he says, Irakumikayal isa jivagal oruporeava undipara, upadi unave verundipara. That means, by their being nature, God and soul, Isa and Jiva, are just one poro, one substance or vastu. Only upadi unavu, adjunct awareness, is what makes them seem different. So long as we are aware of ourselves as one set of upadis, whatever conception we have of God will be another set of upadis, because we cannot know him as he actually is without knowing ourselves as we actually are. as Bhagavan points out in this verse of Upadeshundya, what he actually is and what we actually are is just one substance, namely pure being, which is what he refers to as irakameke, being nature. Therefore, since God shines as our very being, in order to be aware of him as he actually is, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, which means being aware of ourselves without any upadis, as he says in the next verse, namely verse 25 of Upadeshundya. In this verse he says, Tanne upadi vittu ovadu tanisan, tanne unavadam undipara, tanai olivadal undipara. That means knowing oneself without upadis is itself knowing God, because of God always shining, because of God being what is always shining as oneself. If we try to know or see God by any means other than by knowing ourselves as the pure adjunctless being awareness, nirupadika satchit, that we actually are, what we will thereby know or see will be no more than a manomayamam kakshi, a mental vision or mind-constituted image, as Bhagavan says in verse 20 of Uludunapadu. The meaning of this verse is leaving or neglecting to know the reality of oneself, namely ego, who sees all things other than oneself seeing God is manomayamam kakshi, a mental vision or mind-constituted image. Only he who sees himself implying as he actually is, the origin, base, or foundation of himself as ego, is he who has seen God, because oneself as one actually is, which alone is what remains when oneself as ego, the origin of all other things, has gone, is not other than God. When we do not know the reality of ourselves, namely pure being awareness, satchit, we know ourselves as if we were a body, a form consisting of 5 sheaths, and consequently we can know God only as a form, as Bhagavan says in the first sentence of verse 4 of Uludunapadu, Uruvam Tanayin Uluhu Paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world in God will be likewise. Unless we know the reality of ourselves, therefore, we cannot know God as he actually is, but can only know him as a form of one kind or another. And all forms are mental fabrications, manokarpanas. So if we see God without knowing ourselves as we actually are, we would be seeing him just as a manomayamam kakshi, a mental vision or mind-constituted image. Therefore, as he says in the second sentence of this verse, Tanne kanum avan tan kadavul kandanam. That means only he who sees himself is he who has seen God. And he clarifies that what he means here by tanne, himself or oneself, is ourself as we actually are, by adding in apposition to it the phrase tan mudale, which literally means his origin or the origin of himself, thereby implying the origin or source of the ego. The reason why seeing ourselves as we actually are alone is seeing God is tan kadval andri illadal, because oneself is not other than God. And he again clarifies that what he means here by tan, oneself, is ourself as we actually are, by adding an adverbial clause, tan mudalpoi, which literally means oneself, the origin going or having gone, and which implies when oneself as ego, the origin, root, or foundation of all other things, has gone. That is, we are always nothing other than, though we are always nothing other than God, we will be aware of ourselves as such only when ego, the origin and foundation of all phenomena, has been eradicated by our seeing ourselves as we actually are. This is why he says in the first line of this 4th verse, Irundole une vidatu adutidal devam, irutine vilakedutu, adutidal leikan. That means seeking God, leaving you who exist and shine, is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. The lamp that illumines our mind and by which we know everything, both ourself and all other things, is Aruṇācala, or God, who exists and shines in our heart as the light of pure awareness. So this is the Vilaku lamp that Bhagavan refers to here. If we neglect this light, which is the real form, Swarupa of God, and instead seek God outside ourselves, that would be just like taking a lamp to search for darkness. God is the very antithesis of darkness, being the original light of pure awareness, which shines eternally in our heart as our own being, I am. So what Bhagavan implies by this analogy is not that God is darkness, but that searching for him as something other than ourselves is as futile as searching for darkness with the aid of a lamp. However, this is not the only implication of this analogy. Just as light is a metaphor for awareness, clarity, wisdom, and knowledge, darkness is a metaphor for ignorance, confusion, and delusion. So long as our mind, attention, is directed away from ourselves towards anything else, we're ensnared in the darkness of self-ignorance, because it is only when we are aware of ourselves as I am this body that we are consequently aware of anything other than ourselves. Though this false awareness, I am this body, is the darkness of self-ignorance, it is not total darkness, because within this false awareness shines our being, I am, which is the light of real awareness. That is, even when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we never cease to be aware of our being, I am. However, though we are aware that we are not aware what we are, because we mistake ourselves to be something other than ourselves, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths. As Bhagavan used to say, the appearance of phenomena cannot occur either in infinite light or in total darkness, but only in a limited light within a background darkness. And to illustrate this, he gave the analogy of a cinema picture, which cannot appear either in full daylight or in complete darkness, but requires both a limited light from a projector and the darkness of a cinema hall. Without light from a projector, no picture would appear on the screen. But even when light from it does project a picture, if the roof were blown off the cinema, allowing the sunlight to flood the hall, the picture would be swallowed by sunlight and thereby disappear. That is, Bhagavan, as I say, he often used this analogy. The context in which he used it, back in the 1920s and 1930s, when there were no cinemas as such in India. So, but movie companies would travel around showing, film companies would travel around showing films. They would put up a big marquee, a big tent, and in that tent they would show the picture. So that tent provided the darkness. So when Bhagavan used to say this, he said if a strong wind comes and blows away the tent, the sunlight will flood in and the picture on the screen will be swallowed by the sunlight. He used that as an analogy. When self-knowledge dawns, that infinite light of pure awareness, which is Aruṇācala, will swallow the entire picture of this world. He refers to this in Aksharamlai, I can't remember the verse number, Sakalam Virangum Kadiroli Yinamana Jalajamalati Aruṇācala. Wait a second, I'll just get the reference, the verse number. Yes, verse 27 of Aksharamlai, Sakalam Virangum. Kadiroli Inna, sun of bright rays which swallows everything. Mana Jala Jamalati Aruṇācala. Make the lotus of my mind, the lotus of my mind blossom fully. That is, he's comparing Aruṇācala here to the bright sun. That bright sun will swallow everything. But so long as the mind is like a lotus bud closed, the sunlight cannot enter it. So the sunlight not only has to swallow everything, before it swallows everything, it's first got to make the mind blossom with self-knowledge. As soon as it blossoms with self-knowledge, the sunlight floods in and everything is swallowed. And he uses the same analogy in the first verse of Aruṇācala Pancharatna, in which he says, Arul nirevana amrakadale virikadiral yavam virangum. That is, he addresses Aruṇācala as the ocean of ambrosia, the ocean of Amrita, that is the fullness of grace. And by its spreading rays, it swallows everything. And so essentially, it's the same prayer. Therefore, make my heart lotus shine as the sun, making my heart lotus blossom. So coming back to this, since the infinite light of pure awareness that exists and shines eternally and immutably in our heart as I am, is the real form, Swarupa of Aruṇācala, or God, turning our attention back within and thereby being swallowed by him is the only way to see or know him as he actually is. As Bhagavan implies in the final sentence of verse 21 of Ulladu, Unadal Khan, becoming food is seeing. That is, only when we become food for Aruṇācala, in other words, only when he swallows us will we truly know him as he actually is. And as he points out even more explicitly in verse 22 of Ulladu, by asking rhetorically, the meaning of his verse is, except by turning the mind back within, completely immersing it in God, who shines within the mind, giving light to the mind. That implies who shines with pure awareness within the mind, giving light to the mind. How to fathom God by the mind? This is a rhetorical question, but the clear implication is it is not possible to know God by the mind except by turning the mind back within and completely immersing it in him. So only when we are completely swallowed by him, thereby remaining as him alone, do we know him as he actually is. That is, we can never know him as an object. We can only know him by being him. And in order to be him, we need to be swallowed by him. That is, he is what we always actually are, but so long as we rise as ego, we seem to be separate from him. So this ego has to be swallowed by him. In the first line of this fourth verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, Irundoli une vidatu adutital devam, irutine vilakedu editu adutidule kan, seeking God, leaving you who exist and shine, is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. What he implies by saying, Irundoli une vidatu, leaving you who exist and shine, is neglecting to turn our mind back within to immerse it in Aruṇācala, who exists and shines within us as the infinite light of pure awareness, Satchit, I am. Instead of turning our entire attention back within to immerse ourselves in this light, if we look for God as something other than ourselves, we will be using the adjunct conflated light of our mind, which is an infinitesimally limited reflection of the infinite light of pure awareness, to search for him among names and forms which seem to exist only in the darkness of our own self-ignorance. Since all names and forms, objects or phenomena, are born and live only in the darkness of self-ignorance, namely ego, they partake of the nature of their parent, so they too are darkness. And hence Bhagavan says that searching for God among them is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. The word he uses here for God is Devam, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word Daiva, which is an augmented Vritti form of Deva, which means what is divine, deity, or God, which derives from the verbal root div, which means to shine or to be bright. So the root meaning of Deva or Daiva is what shines, or the shining one. And hence this is a very apt term to refer to God, particularly in this context, because he is the original light of pure awareness, which illumines the mind and thereby causes all other things to shine in the view of the mind. That is, all phenomena shine only by the light of the mind, which derives its light from the original light of pure awareness. So only pure awareness shines by its own light, and hence it is described as Swayam Prakasha, self-shining or self-luminous. Since there is no real light other than this self-shining light of pure awareness, it alone is fit to be called Devam, God, the shining one. Therefore, this real light called Devam cannot be found among objects or phenomena, but only deep within the subject, namely ego, the core of the mind, in whose view alone all objects or phenomena seem to exist. Just as in the second line of the previous verse, Bhagavan pointed out the futility of trying to think of, meditate upon, or conceive God as formless, saying, Unnuru aruena unnidil vinnoku ulahu alai tarum oruvane okkum. If one thinks of your form as formless, one is like someone who wanders the world to see the sky. In the first line of this verse, he points out the futility of trying to know him as anything other than oneself, implying as a form of any kind, saying, Irundoli une vidatu adu tidal devam, irutine vilakedu tadu tidal lekan. See, seeking God, leaving you, who exist and shine, is just seeking darkness, taking a lamp. However, this does not mean either that we cannot know God as formless, or that being devoted to him as a form, as if he were other than ourselves, is not an appropriate or useful part of the process of coming to know him as formless. We can know him as formless not by trying to think of him as such, but only by deeply contemplating our own formless being, which shines as our fundamental awareness I am, because this alone is his swarupa, his real form, meaning what he actually is, as Bhagavan implies in the third line of the previous verse. Unnuru unalara unnida munne uru sarkare uruena uruoyum. If when without thinking one thinks deeply of your form, form will cease like a salt dog touching the ocean. Likewise, he implies that being devoted to God as a form is an appropriate and useful part of the process of coming to know him as formless, by saying in the first line of the previous verse, Ninayan uruvena eniye nanda nilamise malayanam nilayene nidan. That means when I approach thinking of you as a form, you yourself have settled, standing firmly as a hill on earth. And in the second line of this verse, Irundoli une arivurutidiku endre irundane matam doram vida vida vuruvai. Only to make yourself, who exist and shine, known, you have been as various forms in every creed. When Aruṇācala exists and shines eternally within each of us as the formless light of pure awareness, without which there would be no knowledge of anything, why does it need to appear as any form in order to make itself known to us? Aruṇācala is Atma-vichara, the real nature of ourself, meaning ourself as we actually are, and it always knows itself as it actually is. But when we rise as ego, we know ourselves as I in this body, and hence we do not know ourselves as we actually are, namely as Aruṇācala, the formless light of pure awareness. Ego is essentially just this formless light of pure awareness, but as such it has no separate existence, but is just ourself as we actually are. It seems to have a separate existence, therefore, only when it mistakes itself to be the form of a body. So it cannot come into existence as a separate entity or endure without mistaking itself to be the form of a body, as Bhagavan points out in verse 25 of Ulurunaptu. What he says in this verse is, Urupatri Undam, grasping form it comes into existence. Urupatri Nikkam, grasping form it stands. Urupatri Undu Mika Ongam, grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Uruvittu Urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. Tedinal Otam Pidikam, if seeking it, it will take flight. Uruvatra Payahande, or such is the nature of the formless demon ego. Investigate. The form that ego grasps as it comes into existence is the form of a body consisting of 5 sheaths. But since no form can exist independent of ego, in whose view alone forms seem to exist, in the first sentence of this verse, Urupatri Undam, grasping form it comes into existence, Urupatri, grasping form, implies projecting a body and simultaneously mistaking it to be I. Likewise, the second sentence, Urupatri Nikkam, grasping form it stands, implies that ego endures only by continuously projecting and mistaking a body to be itself. However, a body is not the only form that ego grasps. Having grasped the body as if it were self, ego projects and perceives a myriad of other forms, both those that constitute the seemingly external world of physical phenomena and those that constitute a relatively more internal world of mental phenomena. And by doing so, it nourishes itself and grows. As he says in the third sentence, Urupatri Undu Mika Ongam, grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Since ego cannot arise, stand, or flourish without grasping form, as soon as it leaves one form, it grasps another form, as he says in the fourth sentence, Uruvittu Urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. Whenever ego stops grasping form, it subsides in a state of temporary dissolution, laya, such as sleep, swoon, coma, general anesthesia, or kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, from which it will rise again. Since it cannot rise or stand even for a moment without constantly grasping form is its very nature. So if instead of grasping form, it tries to grasp its own formless essence, namely awareness, it will subside and dissolve back into the source from which it rose, namely pure being awareness, Sat Chit. As Bhagavan implies in the fifth sentence, Tedinal Otam Pidikam, if seeking, it will take flight. Though Tedinal just means if seeking, and though in this case it has no explicit subject or object, what it implies here is if ego seeks to know its own reality by investigating who am I, or in other words, if ego seeks to know what it actually is by attending to itself alone. To the extent to which we as ego attend only to our own being, our fundamental awareness I am, we will thereby subside. And if we attend to our being so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything else whatsoever, we will subside completely and dissolve back into our being as our being. Thus, in this verse, Bhagavan reveals the nature of this formless demon called ego, namely that it cannot come into existence or endure without grasping. Grasping, and here implies attaching itself to and identifying itself as the form of a body, and it cannot feed itself or flourish without constantly grasping, attending to and experiencing other forms. If it attends only to itself, thereby letting go of all forms, it will subside completely and dissolve forever back into its own formless essence, which is pure being awareness, Sat-Chit, I am. Since this formless essence is the reality not only of ourself, but also of Aruṇācala God, dissolving into it in this way by keenly and steadily attending to it is the only means by which we can know him as he actually is. Until then, we will continue to experience ourselves as if we were a body. And so long as we experience ourselves thus, God will likewise seem to be a form of one kind or another, as Bhagavan points out in the first sentence of verse 4 of Ulladu. Uruvam Tanayin Ulhu Paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. Whatever our conception of God may be, even if we consider him to be infinite and formless being awareness, that is just an idea which is a mental form, because we cannot experience him as the infinite and formless reality that he actually is without experiencing ourselves as such. Since we cannot rise, stand, or flourish as ego without constantly grasping form, it is almost true to say that whenever we have risen as ego, whatever we know is only a form. However, this is not quite true, because without the formless light of awareness, we could not know any forms. So in addition to forms, we also know this light of awareness, which in its pure form is the reality of both God and ourself. Nevertheless, though we know this light of awareness, which is our own being, I am, we do not know it as it actually is, namely as pure formless awareness, because we experience it mixed and conflated with a set of forms, an adjunct or upadhi, as I am this body. So long as we remain as ego, therefore, we cannot know God as the pure, infinite and formless being awareness that he actually is, even though he always exists and shines as such in our own heart. So to make himself known to us in a way that we can more easily relate to, he has appeared as various forms. As Bhagavan says in the second line of this verse, Irundole une arivuru tiraku endre, irutane matum dorum vida vida vuruvai. Only to make yourself, who exist and shine, known, you have been appearing as various forms in every mata, that's every creed or system of religious belief. On one level, we can take the clause, we can take this clause to mean, as I said in the previous paragraph, namely to make himself known to us in a way that we can more easily relate to. But Bhagavan actually means more than just this, because on a deeper level, this clause implies to make himself known as he actually is, namely as pure, infinite, and formless being awareness, Sat-Chit, as indicated by the phrase Irundole une, being and shiny you, or yourself who are and shine. Since Irundu, being or existing, implies existing as pure being, Sat, and Olia, shining or who shines, implies shining as pure awareness, Chit. So how can his appearing as various forms help us to know him as the formless light of pure awareness that he actually is? then I've written a very long section in which I discuss many of Bhagavan's verses from verse 7 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, and then verse 101 of Aksharamlai, and then I referred to Atma-vichara, and to verse 10 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, and then I give a detailed explanation about verses 3 to 9 or 10 of Upadesha Undiyā. I go a detailed explanation of these verses, and then yeah, so it's a very long section, so I won't read all of it now. But that in that section, what essentially I'm explaining is how Bhagavan has explained how devotion to God as a name and form will purify our mind and thereby enable us to know him as formless. So it's not a direct means, but indirectly, because it purifies the mind and thereby gives the mind the clarity to understand what is the real means to know him, which is to turn the mind within. Then I go, after explaining all that, I then go on to say, nevertheless, though practicing devotion to a name or form of God through actions of mind, speech, and body is an indirect means by which we will eventually be enabled to know him as he actually is, we should not lose sight of the fact that he always exists and shines in our heart as our own being, I am. So he is eternally accessible to us, and hence we can know him directly at any time simply by turning our entire attention back within to face him there. Therefore, since by his infinite grace he has made himself eternally available to us by existing and shining as our fundamental awareness I am, which is the self-shining sun by whose light we are able to know all other things, if we do not know him, we are like a blind person who cannot see the sun, as Bhagavan says in the third line of this verse. Irundoli une arihila enil anno irivian arivaru kurudarayava. If there are those who do not know you, who exist and shine, such people are just blind people without knowledge of the sun. What blinds us to the eternal presence of God in our heart as the one real awareness I am is our false awareness of ourself as I am this body. So to cure this blindness of ours and thereby see him as he actually is, all we need do is to remove this false awareness by investigating and thereby being aware of ourselves as we actually are. Instead of removing our false awareness, I am this body, in this way, trying to know him as something other than ourselves is just like Vilakedatu Iritine Adutal, seeking darkness, taking a lamp, as Bhagavan says in the first line of this verse. Since Aruṇācala, or God, exists and shines eternally as the sole reality, he can never be completely unknown to us. So if we seem to not know him, that is only because we know him as something other than what he actually is. This is why Bhagavan compares not knowing him to a blind person not knowing the sun. Though blind people do not know the light of the sun, they are not completely devoid of ability to know the sun, because they can know it by its heat. So though their knowledge of it is limited and incomplete, they know it at least to some extent. Likewise, though our knowledge of Aruṇācala is limited and incomplete, so long as we know ourselves as I am this body, we know him at least to some extent because he is what always exists and shines within us as our own being, I am. And we never cease to be aware I am, even when we're aware of ourselves mixed and conflated with adjuncts, upadhis, as I am this body. As Murugan sings in the Anupallavi of Atma-vichara, Noya tamakum ulankai amalakani poyai oriya mikumeyai uludu anma. Oneself, Atma, exists as so very real, even to those who are simple-minded, but an amalaka fruit on the palm ends as unreal. That is, if you a very common way of, not only in Tamil, in most Indian languages, I think, a very common way of saying, but something is extremely clear, to say it's as clear as an amla on the hand, in the palm. But Murugan is saying here, oneself is so very clear that even that amla on the palm ends as unreal. In other words, it fades away as it's not nearly as clear as the shining of I in our heart. Because each of us always knows ourselves as I. And this truth is echoed by Bhagavan in the first two lines of verse 1 of the same song. May I nirantram tan ayadu or nayadu adutidu irandidavam poyam udumbu ulahum meya muleitu erum. That means, though oneself exists incessantly and indubitably or imperishably as real, the body and world, which are unreal, arise sprouting as if real. The one thing we always know and can never reasonably doubt is our own existence, our very being. And since our being is what is called Aruṇācala or God, we know him incessantly and indubitably, even if we fail to recognize this fact. Though he always exists and shines as our own being, we seem to be ignorant of him because instead of being aware of ourselves as I am, as just I am, as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. However, since he is always so clearly known to us, knowing him as he actually is not difficult, provided that we are willing to pay the price, which is giving up our false identification, I am this body. If we do not know him as he actually is, therefore, we are not just blind, but willfully blind. The only impediment to our knowing him as he actually is, therefore, is our abhimana, our strong attachment to this false identification, I am this body. To overcome this impediment, therefore, we must have all-consuming love to know ourselves as we actually are, which alone is what he actually is. Therefore, if we practice devotion to a name or form of God, instead of channeling all our love and effort in trying to turn our entire attention back within to see him shining in our heart as our own being, what we should pray to him for is to give us all-consuming love, to look deep within ourselves, and thereby to make us see him as the peerless gem of pure awareness, Satchit, which exists and shines in our heart eternally and immutably as the sole reality, other than which nothing exists, as Bhagavan teaches us to pray in the final line of this verse. Irandoli Irandara ena ulatu ondrai inayarum arunama malayanum maniye. A gem of light called the peerless great Aruna Hill. Be, exist, or remain, and shine in my heart as one without a second. Irandu Ara Ondrai, as one without a second, is an allusion to the phrase Ekam Eva Advaitiyam, which occurs in the Chandogya Upanishad 6.2 verses 1 and 2, which states that before this, implying before all this multiplicity appeared, there was Sateva, being only, Ekameva Advaitiyam, one only without a second. That is, being alone existed. Therefore, it was one only without a second. This implies that even now, what actually exists is being only, one only without a second. Because according to one of the fundamental principles of Vedanta, only what is permanent is real. So whatever has not always existed is not real, but just an unreal appearance. Bhagavan expressed this principle by saying, whatever exists at one time, but not at another time, does not actually exist even when it seems to exist. And this principle is being expressed most famously in the first line of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 16, in which Bhagavan Krishna says, Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. Of non-being, asat, there is no being, bhava. Of being sat, there is no non-being, abhava, which Bhagavan Ramana has translated into Tamil in verse 9 of Bhagavad Gita Saram as Ilada Tanaku Irupu Illai Ulla Tanaku Ilame Embudu Illai. For what is not Iladadu, there is not being Irapu. For what is Uladu, there is not what is called non-being Ilame. Thereby implying that what is non-existent does not ever exist, and what does exist is never non-existent. This principle is also expressed by Gaudapada in his Mandukya Karika. Oh, I forgot to put the verse number here. I think it's chapter 2, verse 6, if I remember correctly. He says, Ardavante cha yanasti vata manepi tataha. What does not exist in the beginning and in the end is also thus in the present. So if something didn't exist in the beginning, it doesn't exist at the end. Even in the middle, it doesn't exist. It may seem to exist, but doesn't actually exist. That's the implication. The reason for this is that what is intrinsically existent cannot ever be non-existent. So whatever does not exist at any time is not intrinsically existent, because by coming into existence, it gains existence. And by ceasing to exist, it loses existence. Whatever gains and loses its existence must derive its existence from something else. So whatever is impermanent must derive its existence from something else. And all impermanent things must ultimately derive or borrow their existence or being from something that is permanent. How one thing can derive its existence from another thing can be illustrated by the example of gold and gold ornaments. Without gold, gold ornaments would not exist, so they derive their existence from the gold of which they are made. The same gold that is now a bangle can be melted and formed into some other ornament, such as rings or a necklace. So ornaments are impermanent, whereas gold is relatively permanent. Ornaments are forms and gold is their substance. So forms derive their existence from their substance, which is relatively more permanent than them. The same applies to any form and its substance. Earthenware pots derive their existence from clay, their substance. Though they have a name, form, and function that does not intrinsically belong to clay, they have no existence of their own, because clay is the source from which they derive their existence. Forms, therefore, do not have any independent existence, because for their existence they depend entirely on the substance or substances of which they are formed. Material substances such as gold or clay are not fundamental substances, because they're formed of more basic substances such as molecules, which in turn are formed of even more basic substances such as atoms and subatomic particles. So even such substances are forms that derive their existence from the more basic substances of which they are made, and hence they are impermanent, because they can be broken down and reduced to those more basic substances. What then is the most fundamental of all substances, one substance from which all other substances are formed, and to which they can therefore ultimately be reduced, but which itself is not made of and cannot be reduced to anything else? That one most fundamental substance, porul or vastu, is pure being, because it is the ultimate substance of all things, the one substance from which they all derive their experience. And it is permanent, because all impermanent things depend on time for their temporary existence, whereas time, like all other phenomena, depends on pure being for its existence. Since all things ultimately derive their existence from pure being, none of them is intrinsically existent. So though they seem to exist, they do not actually exist. They gain their seeming existence when they come into being, and they lose it when they cease to be. So it is not their own existence, but one that they have borrowed from their ultimate substance, namely pure being. Therefore, since nothing can be other than pure being, it is necessarily one only without a second, and it existed prior to the appearance of any other thing, including the appearance of time itself, as stated in the Chandogya Upanishad, part 6, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Moreover, since pure being alone is what actually exists, there cannot be any awareness other than it to know it. So it itself must be of the awareness that knows itself, as Bhagavan points out in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyya. Uladu unara unavu ver inmeyin, uladu unavahum undipara, unavei namai ullam undipara. That means, because of the non-being of other awareness, to be aware of what is awareness. Other awareness here means awareness other than what is. To be aware of what is awareness. Awareness alone is as we. Since we are what is aware of being, we ourselves are the awareness that is pure being, the awareness that actually is. As pure awareness, therefore, we alone are what actually is, as Bhagavan points out in verse 13 of Ulladu. What he says here is, he begins by saying, Jnanamam tane me, oneself who is jnana, and jnana here means awareness, alone is real. Nanavam jnanam ajnanamam, awareness that is manifold is ignorance, is ajnana. That is, the jnana that is manifold is ajnana. Even that ignorance which is unreal does not exist except as oneself who is awareness. All the many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is, from a relative perspective, real, say? What he means by me, real, is what actually exists. And what he means by poi, unreal, is what does not actually exist, even if it seems to exist. What actually exists is only ourself as pure awareness, jnana. But when we rise as ego, we're aware of the seeming existence of a multitude of other things. So ego is what he refers to here as nanavam jnanam, awareness that is manifold. In the original version of this verse, which is now verse 12 of Upadesha Tanipakal, the equivalent term he used was nana vaikankindrajnanam, awareness that sees as many. thereby implying the awareness that sees the one thing that actually exists as many things. Since only one thing actually exists, being aware of this one thing as if it were many things is not knowledge but only ignorance. However, even this ignorance cannot be anything other than ourself as pure awareness, just as the many gold ornaments are not anything other than gold. So though this ignorance as such is unreal, as pure awareness, which is its underlying substance, it is real. Since pure being is itself pure awareness, pure being is Sat, that itself is pure awareness, Chit, just as we can explain that all things derive their existence ultimately from pure being, we can equally well explain that they derive their existence ultimately from pure awareness. That is, all things seem to exist only in the view of ourself as ego, so they derive their semi-existence from the semi-existence of ourself as ego. And ego derives its semi-existence and awareness from the real existence and awareness of ourself as we actually are, namely pure awareness. Since nothing other than ourself exists in the view of ourself as ego, in verse 26 of Ulladu, Bhagavan points out, Ahandeundayan anatamundahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Ahandeundrail indruanatam. If ego does not exist, everything does not exist. Ahandeye yavamam. Ego itself is everything. In this context, everything implies all objects or phenomena. And since they all seem to exist only in the view of ego, they appear whenever ego rises, namely in waking and dream, and they disappear whenever ego subsides completely, such as in sleep. Therefore, they do not exist independent of ego. So ego alone is their immediate substance, as Bhagavan implies by saying, Ahandeye yavamam. Ego itself is everything. In other words, what ego is aware of as a multitude of phenomena is actually just itself. Just as in a dream, it sees itself alone as all the dream phenomena. However, though ego is the immediate substance of all other things, it is not their ultimate substance, because it is just a temporary appearance and hence not real. So since it derives its semi-existence from the real existence of ourself as pure being awareness, the one ultimate substance of ego and of everything else is only pure being awareness, Satchit. Therefore, since what exists and shines as Satchit is what is called Aruṇācala or God, it alone is what we actually are, and also what all other things actually are. So it is always one only without a second, Ekkameva Advaityam. However, since we now seem to have risen as ego, we are now aware of ourselves, not just as pure being awareness, I am, but as I am this body. And consequently, we're aware of the semi-existence of so many other things. In order for us to be aware of ourselves as one only without a second, therefore, we must cease rising as ego. And since ego is just a false awareness of ourselves, being awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are, we can eradicate it forever only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. Hence, when Bhagavan prays to Aruṇācala, Irundoli Irundara Enadu Ullatu Ondrai, be and shine in my heart as one without a second, what he is in effect teaching us to pray for is for Aruṇācala to make us see him as the sole reality that he actually is, thereby annihilating ego forever. When he prays thus, be and shine in my heart as one without a second, he clearly implies that what he refers to as my heart is not a second thing other than Aruṇācala, but is Aruṇācala himself. That is, in this context, heart means what is centermost and most interior. So what is in the heart cannot be anything other than the heart. because if anything other than the heart were in the heart, that other thing would be the heart of the heart. Therefore, since Aruṇācala is the ultimate heart, the heart for which there is no other heart, and since it exists and shines eternally as one without a second, it alone is the heart of each and every one of us, meaning it alone is what we actually are. This is made clear by Bhagavan in verse 2 of Aruṇācala Pancharatnam, where he sings, Nityamum nanendru idayam nadituduvayal unpayatan idayam endriduvatam. That means, since you dance eternally in the heart as I, they say your name is heart. That is, what exists and shines in the heart as I is the heart itself, and that is what Aruṇācala actually is. He concludes this prayer, Irundoli Irundara Inatu Ondrai, be and shine in my heart as one without a second, by addressing Aruṇācala's Inayaram Arunama Malayanam Maniye, gem called the peerless great Aruna Hill. It is Inayaram, peerless or without likeness or to any other thing, because it is what exists and shines eternally as Irandu Ara Ondrai, one without a second. And it is money, gem, because it is the self-shining gem of pure awareness, which is the sole reality, the only thing that actually exists, as he implies at the end of the next verse by asking rhetorically, Unnin Maruporul Arunama Malay Aruna Nal Oli Malay Undo. Aruna, hill of sublime light. Is there another thing than you? In other words, is there anything other than you? And as he confirms in the first sentence of verse 6, Undoru Porul Arivoli Ulameni. There is only you, the one thing or one substance, the heart, the light of awareness. Thus it is clear, both from this verse and from the previous verse, that though Bhagavan does acknowledge the value of devotion to a name or form of God as an effective means to purify our mind and thereby enable us to know him as he actually is, he constantly reminds us that ultimately we cannot know him as he actually is by any means other than by meditating on his Swarupa without the slightest movement of mind. Thinking deeply of your form without thinking, as he expressed it in the third line of the previous verse. And since his Swarupa, himself as he actually is, alone is our Swarupa, ourself as we actually are, he is what exists and shines within us as our own being. So meditating on his Swarupa means meditating on nothing other than our own being, which shines as our fundamental awareness I am. Therefore, we should understand from these verses and from other teachings of his that devotion to a name and form is a powerful aid and support for us while following this path of self-investigation, but it can never be an adequate substitute for it. So rather than just practicing devotion to one of his names and forms, we should give priority to the deepest and most effective of all practices of devotion, bhakti, which is trying to know him directly by fixing our attention on his Swarupa, which exists and shines within us as our own being. The importance and efficacy of this practice of self-investigation is further emphasized by Bhagavan in the next verse. And that next verse, I may be able to talk about it during our next meeting, but probably not till the second meeting in November. Does anyone have any questions about this verse or about my explanation of it?
There is something from Guru Vachakakove.
Shalini, I had a quick comment question.
Yes.
May I go
Yes,
ahead,
please,
or is that?
please.
Thank you, Shalini. what I wanted to mention, it was a wonderful, very detailed and completely self-explanatory, discourse that you gave us right now, Bhagwan. I'm calling you Bhagwan, Michael, but really, it's everything what you covered was absolutely there. The only thing I think you did not mention, which is also there everywhere, is that Arunachalam is the Adi Lingam or the formless form, and therefore in abiding in the formless form within one, as a column of light shining within one as the formless form, we are able to better abide in ourself and eradicate ego. And is in that just that mention of the Adi Lingam as a formless form, Arunachalam. And that's the only thing I thought was not there,
That's true. Aruṇācala is the Adi Linga. That is the original Linga form of Shiva. And the significance of a Linga form, whereas almost all other forms of God are personal forms. Even I've written in human-like form, such as Rama and Krishna, and we also have a human-like form of Lord Shiva, or in an animal form such as Ganesha or Hanuman. But the linga, the significance of the Shiva linga, it's an abstract form, and what the Shiva linga is intended to represent is the formless nature of God. Because ultimately, though God can appear in form, ultimately he's infinite, and the infinite means formless. Every form is a limitation, because every form is distinct from every other form. So forms are inherently finite, limited, whereas whereas God is infinite. So the Shiva Linga represents that formless nature of God, the essential formless nature of God, and Aruṇācala is the Adi Linga, it's the original Linga. So Aruṇācala is a form to represent formlessness.
Yes, that's the only thing I thought. Everything, I mean, it's in fact, as the Adi Lingam, as the formless form, it is actually the column of light or that infinite sky that is also mentioned in all the other verses.
That column of light,
Yes.
again, that signifies the light
yes.
of pure awareness.
Yes,
Bhagavan so often refers to Aruṇācala as the hill of light, the hill of, and also he refers to it as Chit Sarupam in Aruṇācala Navamanyamalai, he whose very nature is Chit. He also, in another verse of, the final verse of Aruṇācala Navamanyamalai, he refers to it as Chinmaya, that which is composed of awareness. So Aruṇācala represents that formless being awareness, which is the real nature of God and the real nature of ourself.
Yes, and since this verse seems to dwell mostly on the shining and the shining of, and not to
the being and the shining.
The being and the being is shining as being, and being as the column of light, being as Aruṇācala Shiva himself abiding within one, which we can only do by giving up multiplicity of thinking, which arises when we think of ourselves as a body, and duality, which arises as thinking ourselves as a body. So when we can give that up and find just be that column of light and give up the lamp, the instead of just being seeking darkness, and the lamp through darkness, that's the wrong way to go about it, which is to really seek the light within, which is the eternal flooding, eternal, absolute, immutable, unchangeable light within, right? So that is what this verse seems to but thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. Om Namo Bhagavate.
Another thing about the significance of the linga. The linga is usually set in a base. That base is sometimes rather inappropriately referred to as yoni. But what it represents is Aruṇācala is the center, the heart. Shiva, the linga is the heart, the center. And the base, it represents all the world of phenomena, all the external world of material phenomena, and the relatively internal world of mental phenomena. They are all the center of all of these. The heart is the linga. So linga also represents the heart, the center of all.
Yes.
And that center is I, as Bhagavan makes clear in the second verse of Pancharatnam. He's always dancing in the heart as I, therefore, and that I is itself the heart. Though he says it dancing in the heart as I, he then goes on to say, therefore, or your name is heart.
Yes. It's the heart. The heart is the linga, and the Shakti, which is around it, or the yoni, is the samsara, or the manifestation of the world, as within the internal world or the external world.
But
and
even when that world is manifest, it's just an appearance, but ever at the center, the heart of everything is Shiva, I.
Shiva, I am, as I am, yes. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Shivoham, Shivoham.
Oh, yes, Shivoham. Shivoham. Yes. Yes, thank you. Namo Ramanaya.
And Shalini, Sadashiva has his hand up. I don't know whether he's got a question about this verse or...
Yes, it may be about this verse. Sadashiva, is it a question about this verse?
Yes, it is. Actually, apologies about the Om earlier. Sometimes I just close my eyes and start oming. Anyway, the question is, being exists eternally and other is only temporary, but it seems there must be intent for other coming into existence.
We say that all intent and purpose is it's the mind that looks for purpose. In being there is no purpose. Purpose is itself a part of the manifestation. We look for a purpose for the manifestation, but that any purpose we find is itself a part of the manifestation. So ultimately the reality is beyond all purpose. It just is. It just is as I am. That is, the reality is truly not it, a third person. It is I, the reality of the first person. And we look for a purpose on the assumption that manifestation has actually taken place, but in whose view has all this manifested or appeared? It's only in the view of ego. And if we investigate ego, we will find there's no such thing at all. As Bhagavan says in verse 17 of Upadeshundya, Manati nurube maravaduchava manamenamondrile undipara. Without forgetting, if we investigate the form of the mind, that is ego, we'll find there's no such thing at all. When we find there's no such thing as ego, then there's no appearance, no phenomena, because the appearance is only in the view of ego. Therefore, the ultimate truth is ajata. There never was any appearance, never was any creation, never was any utpatti, na nirodho, na chutpatti. There's no destruction because there never was anything that ever came into existence. So the ultimate truth is ajata. So it's only in our ignorance that we look for purpose. Our mind is satisfied when we find a purpose. Oh, God has created us for some good purpose. We look for that for our satisfaction, but ultimately none of this is. Ultimately, there is just one only without a second, Sateva, the being alone. And Tattvamasi, that you are. We are nothing other than that.
Okay, Michael, earlier you stated that that the mind has to be saturated with the concept of self-knowledge in order to consistently pursue the knowledge of the self. So if it doesn't even exist, then how could the mind become saturated?
Okay, I didn't quite say that. But what I did say, the mind needs to be purified. Bhagavan made that very clear. So long as, but what are the impurities in the mind? The impurities of the mind are the Vishaya vasanas. That is the inclination to attend to things other than ourselves, to Vishayas, to objects or phenomena. That is the impurity. So long as we have strong Vishaya vasanas, we will not be willing to turn within and surrender ourselves completely. We can surrender ourselves completely only by turning within and merging back into our source. So we will be unwilling to do so. That's why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. We need all-consuming love in order to be willing to follow this path. So purification of mind is necessary. That's one thing. And you were saying, how is it, if the mind doesn't exist, how is it possible? Yes, the mind doesn't exist, ego doesn't exist, but it seems to exist. The problem we face is just a seeming problem. But so long as we rise as ego, seemingly rise as ego, this all seems very, very real. Simply saying, oh, it's all unreal, it's all just an appearance, that doesn't solve our problem, that doesn't solve our suffering, that doesn't solve the problem of samsara, this repeated cycle of birth and death. It doesn't solve the problem of us dreaming one dream life after another dream life. This goes on until we as ego need to know ourselves as we actually are. That is what we actually are. The pure awareness always knows itself as it actually is. We seem to have separated ourselves from it. So the solution to this seeming separation and this seeming suffering is to know ourselves as we actually are.
I see. So the dream analogy or the virtual reality analogy is it's basically thy will be done, because it's a waste of time. It just
Yes. What Bhagavan teaches about dream, it's not just an analogy. He said this is nothing but a dream. But so long as we're dreaming, the dream seems very real. If we're experiencing a nightmare, some terrifying situation, being chased by a monster or whatever it is, being in some very distressing situation, it's all unreal. But so long as we're experiencing it, it all seems very real. For people who are experiencing people who are terminally ill with cancer, their cancer is very real. People who are in a war zone being bombed every day, people who are starving, all this is very, very real, seemingly. So because of it all seems to be real, but actually there's only one thing that is real. What is real is ourself. When we identify ourselves with a body, the body, therefore, seems to be real. And this body is a small part of this world, so the whole world seems to be real. So it all seems very real. If it didn't seem real, it wouldn't be a problem. But the very nature of illusion, when you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the snake seems perfectly real. So it is, it's not real, of course, but it seems real. It's a seeming, so all our problems are just illusory, they're just seeming, but they seem very real. So we have to find a solution. And Bhagavan has come to tell us the solution. He diagnosed the root cause of the problem. The root cause is our identification with this body. This Dehatma Buddhi, this is the root cause. This is the whole of Vedanta is centered around this. Krishna begins the Gita from chapter 2, verse 11, when Krishna's teachings begin. He begins by distinguishing ourself from the body. And he goes on throughout. In chapter 13, he distinguishes the kshetra from the kshetrajna. The kshetra is the body. The kshetrajna is that which knows the body. So he's creating that separation. But the kshetrajna mistakes itself to be the kshetra. The knower of the body mistakes itself to be the body. So we've got to turn our attention away from the body, away from all phenomena, back towards ourselves, the knower of all these things. So this is what Vedanta is all about. The root cause of all problems is our identification with this body. And the only way to get rid of this identification is to know ourselves as we actually are.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Right, thank you.
There's a question. There are a couple of questions on the verses. The first one is, what does Bhagwan mean by slowly, slowly turn within, when Bhagwan in fact recommends continuous practice? Does that mean we should do continuous practice but slowly? Michael also mentioned about a Telugu person in the ashram who developed mental issues after doing rigorous practice. Is this something to be avoided?
Where Bhagavan says slowly, slowly, that is in Bhagavad Gita Saram, he has translated verse 25 of Bhagavad Gita Saram, of chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita. He's translated that in Bhagavad Gita Saram. That verse in the Gita, Krishna begins with the word sane sane. Sane sane means gently, gently, gradually, gradually, slowly, slowly. And Bhagavan translates as mela mela. That also means the same. Why that is stressed? Yes, our aim is to fix our mind on ourselves. As Krishna says in that same verse, Atma samsta mana kritva na kinchitapi chintayat. Fix your mind on yourself. Do not think of anything else. That is what we're aiming for. That's why Bhagavan always stressed that this has to be permanent. He says, when he defines what is meant by Atma-vichara in the 16th paragraph of Nana, he says, Sada kalamum. Sada kalamum means always. Sada kalamum manate atma vil vetirapatu. Always keeping the mind fixed on oneself, that is Atma-vichara. That alone is Atma-vichara. So he stresses it needs to be always constant. And he also says in the 11th paragraph, Oruvan tan sarupa madeyam varayil nirantara sarupa smaranaye kai patravanayan adu andre podam. So until we attain Swarupa, if we hold on to uninterrupted Swarupa Smarana, that's self-remembrance, attention to our own real, what we actually are, our own being, Adu Andre Podam, that alone is sufficient. So that need for constant self-attentiveness is emphasized so much by Bhagavan. But in order to achieve that, are we able to achieve that? If our mind was perfectly pure, we would be able to achieve that here and now. Why haven't we achieved it yet? Because our mind keeps on going out towards other things. So our aim is to fix our mind on ourselves permanently. But in order to achieve that, we need to go about it gently and gradually. Like he says in the 6th paragraph of Nana, whenever anything else appears, when any thought appears, that means anything appears, to whom does it appear? It's necessary to investigate. The fact that something has appeared means our attention has gone away from ourselves towards that other thing. So we need to bring it back. So inevitably, it's the nature of the mind to be fickle. It's the nature of mind, as Krishna says in the next verse of Gita, which Bhagavan has also translated, this chanchala mind, this mind whose very nature is movement, though it wherever it goes, you need to bring it back and fix it on itself. So practice is necessary. And it's only by, as Bhagavan says, it's only by practicing and practicing in this manner that the mind will gain the power to remain in its birthplace. So until we achieve that Nirantara Swarupa Smarana, that uninterrupted self-remembrance, we need to be gently, but firmly, but persistently practicing this. Regarding that Telugu gentleman who lost his mental balance, we also need to be wise when we need to recognize the fickle nature of the mind. We need to be realistic. We need to go about this in a way that is achievable. If we sit for 12 hours a day with our eyes closed, thinking that we're thereby going to achieve self-attentiveness, it's not going to be achieved. We can't force it. We need to slowly. Bhagavan used the analogy of, for example, well, in a slightly different context, he used the analogy of a tame deer used to catch a wild deer. That was actually in a different context. But we need to slowly wean the mind off its outward going inclinations and develop a love to turn within. So when the mind is always rushing outwards and when we're not able to keep it fixed on ourselves, then it is good to go back to Bhagavan's teachings, read Bhagavan's teaching, think about his teaching. That is what will give us the encouragement to continue trying. But that Telugu gentleman, he very seldom spoke to anyone, but he once told me that he had thrown away his glasses. After reading Nana, he understood there's nothing more for him to read. So he threw away his glasses. He thought all he had to do is to practice this. If we're able to, that's fine. But obviously he was pushing himself. And when we can't force it. This is the key to success in this path is love. We need to cultivate that love for self-attentiveness. We will attend to ourselves only when we have true love to attend to ourselves. If we are lacking that love, we need to go about it slowly, gently, slowly weaning the mind off all its interest in so many other things and bringing it back to ourselves. So it is a gradual process, but it's a gradual process aiming towards permanent self-attentiveness. And so long as we continue to rise as ego, it requires effort to be self-attentive because the natural nature of the mind is to go outwards. But when we practice sufficiently and are able to hold on to that self-attentiveness sufficiently, we will eventually be able to turn our attention within to such an extent that we cease to be aware of anything else other than our own being. As soon as we're aware of nothing other than ourselves, that is pure awareness. So as soon as we experience ourselves as pure awareness, ego is thereby annihilated. Then we will find that awareness of ourselves as we actually are doesn't require effort. It's our very nature. But until this ego is annihilated, so long as Vishaya Vasana still exists in the mind, so long as we still have any interest to attend to anything other than ourselves, so long the investigation, who am I, is necessary. Bhagavan says very clearly in the 11th paragraph of Nana.
So the next one is, today I read this about Annamalai that is related to what Michael is exposing. Though Bhagwan had asked me not to come to the ashram anymore, I still thought that I had the freedom to talk to him when he visited Palakottu. Bhagwan disabused me of this notion shortly afterwards when I went to see him while he was walking on the hill. He turned to me and said, "You are happier than I. What you had to give, you have given. What I had to give, I have given. Why are you still coming to see me?" These were his last words to me. I obeyed his instructions and never approached him again. I still had Bhagwan's darshan when he came on his daily walk to Palakottu, but we never spoke to each other again. If we met accidentally, he would walk past me without acknowledging my presence. Bhagwan had once told me, "Do not cling to the form of the Guru, for this will perish. Do not cling to his feet, for his attendants will stop you. The true Bhagwan resides in your heart as your own self. This is who I truly am." By severing the personal link between us, Bhagwan was trying to make me aware of him as he really is. Bhagwan had frequently told me that I should not attach a name and form to the self or regard it as in any way a personal being. Bhagwan gave me his grace and then severed the personal relationship between us. The bond of love and devotion was not separated. It was just restricted to the mind and the heart.
Yeah, I think that's, when you say Annamalai, I think you mean Annamalai Swami. Yeah, I don't know how true it is, but I mean, some of the things Annamalai Swami says are a little bit, well, yeah, some of the things are not very characteristic of Bhagavan, but it is true. Bhagavan did often emphasize the true form of a guru is not the external form, but what is shining in our heart as I. Guru takes on an external form in order to give us these teachings to turn within. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be devoted to the external form, because by being devoted to that external form, that purifies the mind. But the real devotion, I mean, more than just attaching importance to the external form of Bhagavan, is Bhagavan always lives in the form of his teachings. So, and his teachings are what are constantly reminding us of the need to turn within. So we need to we need to keep our mind dwelling on his teachings. Whenever the mind comes out, we need to keep it dwelling on his teachings in order to encourage it to go back within. So this is a process. It's a gradual, gentle process in which we're weaning the mind off its interest in external phenomena and slowly shifting it back within. This is the process that Bhagavan has shown us. We each have to undergo this process ourselves. So of course we will never, so long as we experience ourselves as a form, we will never cease loving the form of Bhagavan. But his true form, his Swarupa, is Atma-swarupa, what is ever shining in our heart as our own being. That is what we need to focus more and more on turning within. The external form, devotion to the external form, that's a great support, a great aid in this path. But that's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. So we should always keep the end in mind. The end is to know ourselves. And to know ourselves, we need to investigate ourselves.
There's another question from a text from Guru Vachaka, and then we can go on to the more general questions in order. Could Michael expand on this quote from Guru Vachaka 534? Let highly mature and courageous aspirants who have a bright and sharp intellect firmly accept that soul, that is jiva, is only one, and thereby is only one, that is eka, and thereby be established deep in the heart by inquiring, who am I? That one, jiva. It is only to suit immature minds that scriptures generally say that souls, that is jivas, are many, nana. To whom is our dear Michael talking if we follow Bhagwan's advice?
That is, when we look outside, we see what seem to be many jivas. That is because jiva means ego. As ego, we experience ourselves as if we were a person. So because ego experiences itself as a person, it sees every other person as a jiva, just like itself. So when we turn outwards, there's the appearance of a multiplicity of jivas. And all the other people we see are just as real as this person. So Bhagavan is not telling us that we should not, we should go around thinking that we are the only person. Bhagavan's teaching, this Ekajiva Vada is much. It's a very subtle form of solipsism. It's not a social solipsism, it's a metaphysical solipsism. So when we are see how Bhagavan interacted with the world. He interacted with the world as if there are many of us. The difference is, in our view, it seems Bhagavan is kind and loving to each and every individual. But the truth is, Bhagavan doesn't see us as the person that we see ourselves to be. He loves us as himself because he sees us as himself. So for Bhagavan, there are no differences. But so long as we are identified with the body, we identify every other body seems to us to be, there seems to be an I in every other body. And just like we are suffering, we see the I in other bodies is also suffering. So the appearance of a multiplicity of jivas, Bhagavan never didn't say there doesn't seem to be many jivas. He's saying, just like in a dream there's one dreamer. The dreamer is not the person. The dreamer takes itself to be in a dream. The dreamer takes itself to be a person, which is a part of the dream. And because it takes itself to be one person, it sees many other people, and all those other people seem to be as real as the person it takes itself to be. So long as we are looking outwards, there's an appearance of multiple jivas. But the truth is, all this multiplicity of jivas appears to whom? To me. Who am I? So why Bhagavan emphasized Ekajiva Vada? It's not, we cannot apply Ekajiva Vada externally. If we do so, it's highly inappropriate. Bhagavan never behaved as if he, Ramana Maharshi, I'm the only one. He never behaved like that. He behaved in a very normal way externally, very kind to everyone and everything. So that is how we should behave externally. But he says those who have a very sharp intellect, when Bhagavan gives us this Ekajiva Vada, which he said explicitly in that verse of Guru Vachaka Kavai, but it's implicit in so many other places. It's implicit throughout Uladunapadu and in so many places. I mean, in Uladunapadu, for example, when he says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That clearly implies there's only one ego, which is in whose view all this everything appears. But how this teaching is to be applied is by turning our attention within. So the correct application of Ekajivavada is not to change our external behavior, but to turn our attention back within. So we behave in this world. This entire world is an appearance. But we don't, for that reason, step out in the road in front of a bus. We don't, for that reason, walk off the top of a tall building or a cliff or something. We behave in this world as if this was all real. So, just as real as this world seems to be, the multiplicity of jivas seems to be just as real. So we behave as if there are a multiplicity of jivas. But when inwardly we should understand all this multiplicity of jivas appears only in my view. So who is this I who sees this multiplicity of jivas? And we should turn our attention back within to investigate that I. That is how to apply Bhagavan's teaching correctly. That's why he very clearly says, those who have a clear and sharp intellect should accept this and turn their attention within to investigate who am I. He doesn't say you should accept this and behave accordingly. No, outwardly we should behave as if we are just, because who is behaving outwardly? It is not the jiva, it's the person we seem to be. Because we mistake ourselves to be the person, we feel I am behaving in this world. So the root problem, again, it comes back to this, what Bhagavan always emphasizes, the root problem, this Dehatma Buddhi, this identification of ourselves as I am this body. And it's the very nature of ego to identify itself as I am this body. So long as we take this body to be I, every other living body seems to be an I, just like this one. So the appearance of a multiplicity of jivas, that inwardly we should understand that though there's this appearance, this is all just an appearance. To whom does it all appear? To me. Who am I? We turn our attention back to ourselves.
I'll ask the questions which were sent by email first and then get back to the ones which were asked today. So there are two questions. The first is, has Bhagavan said that the source of the I thought and the breath is the same? Please do confirm.
Yes, yeah, okay. If you ask the second part, and then I'll answer them both together.
And the second one is, if so, can we say that the practice of self-attention and watching the breath are one and the same, and that both these practices are equally capable of revealing our true being by annihilating the ego?
The answer to the first question is yes. The answer to the second question is no. That's a simple answer, but I'll explain more. Yes, Bhagavan has clearly said that the source of the I thought and the breath is the same. That is very clear in verses 11 and 12 of Upadesha Undiya. What he says in verse 11 is, Vali ul adaka, vale padu pulpol, ulamum adungurum undipara, odaka upayam yidundipara. What that means is, when one restrains the breath within, like a bird caught in a net, the mind will be restrained. This is a means to restrain. So what he's saying here, if we restrain the mind, that means if we curb the activity of the mind, that will calm down the mind. This is a simple fact that we can observe. If the mind is very agitated, the breath will be, it will reflect in the breath. The breath will be, if we want to calm the mind down, we simply have to calm down our breathing, and that will have a calming effect on our mind. Likewise, when the mind is calmed down, the breathing will also calm down. So there's a connection between the mind and the breath. And he explains that more in the next verse, verse 12. He explains why this is the case. He says, Ulamum virum unavum sealum, Ulavam kile irendu undipara, ondru avatrin mulam undipara. What that means is, mind and breath are two branches which have knowing and doing. Their root is one. What that implies is mind and breath, they're two branches from a single root, implying, and the function of the mind is knowing, the function of the breath actually here means, it implies more than just the breath. It's the prana, it's the life. That has doing, that has activity comes from the life, and the knowing is the nature of the mind. But the root of them is one. That is why they're connected. He explains this in more detail in paragraph 8 of Nana. In what he says in paragraph 8 of Nana, he begins by saying, for the mind to cease except vicharana, that implies Atma-vichara, self-investigation, except that there's no adequate means. This is that itself is an answer to the second question. So there's no adequate means other than self-investigation. If made to subside by other means, the mind remaining as if it had ceased will rise up again. So if you restrain the mind by any means other than self-investigation, the most you can achieve is just a temporary subsidence, a temporary cessation of the mind. Then he goes on to say, even by pranayama, that's breath restraint, the mind will subside. However, so long as the prana remains subsided, the mind will also remain subsided. And when the prana emerges, the mind will also emerge and wander under the sway of its vasanas. The implication here is simply restraining the prana and thereby restraining the mind is not curbing is not going to eradicate the vasanas, because as soon as the prana comes out, the mind will come out and the mind will again wander under the sway of its vasanas. And then from here onwards, I'll read the Tamil. He says, manatikum prananakum Pirapidam Andre, the birthplace, that is the source of the mind and of the breath, is one. And then he goes on to say, Nineve Manatin Sarupam. Thought alone is the nature of the mind. Nanenam Nineve Manatin Mudal Ninevu. The thought called I is the first thought of the mind. Aduve ahankaram, that alone is ego. So I thought, ego, they're just two, they're synonyms, they mean the same. Ahankaram engirandu upatio, angirandutan muchum kalambam. From where the ego arises, from there also the breath arises. Ahayal manam Manamadangam podu prananam, pranamadangam podu manamum adangam. Therefore, when the mind subsides, the prana subsides. And when prana subsides, the mind subsides. And then he says, pranan manatin stula rupam enapadam. The prana is called or said to be the gross form of the mind. Maranakalam Varayil, Manam Pranane Udalil Vetu Kondirandu, Udal Marikum Kalatil, Adane Kavandu Kondu Pokiradu. That means until the time of death, the mind keeps the life, the prana, in the body. Oh, the mind keeping the prana in the body. It's put as an adverbial participle. Udal maricum kalatil. At the time of the death of the body, Adane refers to the prana, kavandu kondu, the mind takes it, the prana, and it takes it along with it. Ahayal pranayamam manate adaka sahayamahume andri manonasam sayadu. Therefore, pranayama is only a means, only an aid to subdue the mind, but it will not bring about manonasa. So this requires a little bit more explanation. That is, the mind here refers to ego. The nature of ego is to take a body to be I. But has anyone ever experienced a dead body as I? No. Obviously, when we experience ourselves as I in this body, the body we experience as I is a living body. So as soon as we rise as ego, we project a living body as I. So the life arises along with ego. Though Bhagavan, in one sentence, he uses, instead of using the word prana, he uses the word mucha, which means breath. Why the breath is referred to? Breath is the most obvious sign of life in the body. So long as we're breathing, we're alive. When the breathing stops, we're dead. So that is, the life is more than just the breathing. The life for all the physiological functions of the body, the heartbeat and the respiration, but the digestion, all these, there's so many functions of life in the body, but there's a clear difference between a living body and a dead body. So long as the body is, until the time of death, the mind keeps the life in the body. And when the body dies, when the body becomes worn out or becomes inoperable, the mind takes the breath along with it. When he says it takes the breath along with it, takes the prana along with it, it means whenever ego rises, it projects the body and takes that body behind. That life is an integral part of the body. So the ego is always accompanied by life, and the gross vehicle through which that life manifests is this body. So that's why Bhagavan said the prana and the mind, they're like two branches. They go hand in hand. But the root is the mind, because it's he doesn't say the prana takes the mind with it. He said the mind takes the prana. But the prana is just a gross form of the mind. How we know that someone is, the presence of the mind is because there's life in the body. We don't, once a body is clearly lifeless, we don't think there's still a mind there. We know the mind has gone off somewhere else, or whatever is our idea about it, but the mind is no longer present. So mind and life go hand in hand. That is, mind in the sense of ego is not any of the five sheaves. The five sheaves are all what the mind identifies as I. So those five sheaves are the grossest form of the five sheaves. The grossest one of the five sheaves is this physical body. Subtler than the physical body is the life that animates it. Subtler than the life that animates it is the mind. Here mind is used in a different sense to mean the grosser functions of the mind, that is perception, memory, thinking, feeling, emotion, and so on. That's what's called Manomaya Kosha. That's the gross aspect of mind. Subtler than the Manomaya Kosha is the Vijnanamaya Kosha. That's the intellect. And subtler than the intellect is the Anandamaya Kosha, which is what is also called the Chittam, the will. That's all the vasanas, the totality of all the vasanas. Ego is not any of these. Ego is that which identifies all these as I. So what actually accompanies ego, when the body dies, what actually accompanies ego is the karana sarira, the causal body, which is the will, all the vasanas. Ego takes the vasanas with it. One of the most basic vasanas is the vasana, the inclination to experience a body as I, and that is the life. So long as we identify the body as I, we cling to the life in this body. So you can see, if you see someone who is passing away, often there's a struggle towards the end. The light, they're trying to hold on to that body. So long as they're holding on to the body, the breath is visible there. Then the breath subsides, and after a few moments it suddenly starts again, because they're still not willing to let go. This is a struggle that usually happens at the time of death, because we are so strongly attached to this body. And the sign that we're still holding on to the body is the breath. So the breath is the gross form of a prana, is the gross form of the mind. That is what it said. Regarding the second question, no, because the question is, can we say that the practice of self-attention and watching the breath are one and the same? Absolutely not. The reason is very simple. So long as we rise as ego, we experience these 5 sheaves as I. But if we think about it carefully, these 5 sheaves are experienced by us as objects. This body is clearly an object. The breath is clearly an object. All the signs of life are clearly objects. They're clearly perceptible. The mind, meaning all the thoughts, feelings, perceptions, memories, and everything, these are all objects known by us. This is what is called drisya viveka. We need to distinguish ourselves as the knower, the seer, from everything that is seen. All the 5 sheaves are things seen by us. Just like the grosser functions of the mind are experienced by us, the workings of the intellect are also experienced by us. And the vasanas are experienced by us. The vasanas, what rise in the form of likes, dislikes, desires, attachment. These are all things experienced by us. They're all drisya. They're all objects. As Bhagavan says in verse 16 of Upadesha Saram, the Sanskrit version of Upadesha Undya, he says, Drisya Varitam. I've forgotten exactly what, sorry, I'm just trying to remember what varitum means. It means withdrawn from, or kept back from. The mind kept back from drisya, chittam atmanaha chitva. The mind seeing its own chitva, its own consciousness, its own knowingness, its own awareness, that is tattva darshanam. So the prana is drisya. We need to withdraw our mind from the drisya and fix it on the essential chit element of the drik. It's often said you have to see the seer. But why we see the seer? Because what the seer essentially is just awareness. So we're attending to the awareness. In in a passage in Maharshi's Gospel, it's recorded that Bhagavan explained that ego is chit jada granti. It's the knot that binds chit and jada. That is, the chit element is the I am. The chit means awareness. The awareness element is I am. The jada element, the non-aware element, is all the five sheaves. So ego is the knot that binds these together as if they were one. And Bhagavan says, in your investigation into the source of the ahamvriti means the I thought or ego, you take the essential chit aspect of ego. So when we're investigating ourselves, we're not investigating the body or the mind or the prana or anything. We're investigating the awareness that knows all these things. That is why this Drisya Viveka is extremely important. Drisya Viveka is not just, it begins as a conceptual analysis. By conceptual analysis, we distinguish the knower from the known. But there's a reason for this, because in order to know our own reality, we need to investigate not anything that is known, but the knower of everything. So we distinguish ourselves as the knower. We are not the kshetra, we're the kshetrajna. The prana is part of the kshetra, the field, as Krishna says in the Gita. Ego is the kshetrajna, the knower of the field. So what we are to investigate is not the field or any part of the field such as the prana. We are to investigate the knower of the field, the kshetrajna. So if we watch the breath, we are watching a second person. We're watching an object. Self-investigation is not watching any objects, it's watching the subject in order to see what is the reality of the subject. So there's nothing that is Atma-vichara, self-investigation, which means, as Bhagavan says, fixing the mind on ourselves. In other words, fixing our attention on ourselves. It cannot be compared to any other practice, because every other practice, the mind is fixed on some object, whether it's a breath or a form of God or a name of God or some chakra in the body or whatever it is. It's all objective meditation. The meditation Bhagavan teaches us is Swarupa Dhyana, meditation on our own real nature, our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am. That is what we need to investigate. That's what we need to meditate upon. So watching the breath is a means to calm down the mind. Because when we watch the breath, naturally the breathing calms down, and so the mind calms down. But what to do with that calm mind? What's the use of a calm mind? Sometimes the mind is agitated, sometimes it's calm. It's still in ignorance. The only benefit of a calm mind, it's easier with a calm mind to turn our attention back to ourselves than when our mind is much agitated. But that doesn't mean we have to first calm down the mind and then attend to ourselves, because the most effective way to calm down the mind is to attend to ourselves. If our mind is so agitated that we're unable to attend to ourselves, then okay, watch the breath or think, do japa of Ramana, or whatever is our Ishtadeva. We can watch the breath or do japa or do some meditation, but that's just to bring about calmness in the mind. Then we need to use that calmness to turn our attention back to ourselves. But we shouldn't be always depending on these aids, because self-attention is a complete practice in itself. No aid is necessary. The reason aids seem to be necessary is because of our lack of love to attend to ourselves. And of all the aids to self-attention, thinking of Bhagavan's teachings and understanding his teachings, that is the greatest aid, because that is what pushes our attention, that's what motivates us to turn our attention back to ourselves. So Bhagavan did acknowledge that watching the breath is a means to calm down the mind. He did not ever recommend it. If people wanted to do it, okay, let them do it. He didn't object to people doing that, but he made it clear the most important thing is attending to ourselves. And the greatest aid to attending to ourselves is to keep our mind on Bhagavan's teaching, because his teachings are constantly impressing upon us the need to attend to ourselves. To attend to ourselves alone and not to anything else. So is that an adequate answer to that question? I don't know whether the person who's asked the
Yes,
question.
Michael. Yes.
Is that
Quite
clear?
convenient. Yeah, very clear, very clear.
Okay, good.
I just needed to hear it once more from
Okay.
your lips.
Whether from my lips, hear it from Bhagavan. That is, all these, how am I able to answer all these questions people ask? I'm able to answer them only because, by his grace, I'm able to see that the answer to all these questions are either implicit or explicit in his teachings. That is, when we read Bhagavan's teachings, we need to understand, when we read his verses, for example, like today I talked about this verse 4. It has, in a minute or two, I can talk about the meaning of the verse, but it's not just the meaning of the verse, it's what is the implication. That is, in Bhagavan's verses, there's so much implication. So that's what manana is, understanding the implication behind the word. That's why Sravana is just the beginning. We need to pay, Sravana means paying close attention to the words. Literally it means hearing, but the implication is Sravana, we need to pay close attention. So first we need to pay close attention to Bhagavan's words, but then we need to understand, why we pay close attention to them is in order to understand them. The more we keep our mind dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings, the more they themselves will reveal to us their inner meaning and implication. That's why I said earlier at the beginning, I said, for me, writing these explanations, this itself is a manana, because in order to explain these things, I have to think about it. And as I think about it, Bhagavan reveals more and more and more meanings and implications in these words. So it's only, whatever answers I give, it is, I can't say my answers are always perfect, but at least it's based on my understanding of what Bhagavan has said. So it's all the source of everything that I say. Well, when I go wrong, then that's my misunderstanding. But if there's anything right in anything I say, it's because it's based on Bhagavan's words.
There is one more question I would like to ask you, Michael. If you
Yes, certainly.
Once a young gentleman from Andhra Pradesh, he comes to have Bhagavan's darshan, and wants some spiritual instruction from him. So he asked Bhagavan to give him some spiritual instruction. And Bhagavan says to him, "Manda vadilepo, go back the way you came."
Yes.
And he was shocked to receive such an answer. He thought that I have come all the way from Andhra Pradesh to receive spiritual instruction from Bhagavan, and Bhagavan is telling me to go back the way I came. So should I go back to Andhra Pradesh again? That was what he thought. Yeah. And then the devotees around, other devotees explained, no, that is not what Bhagavan meant. Bhagavan only meant to go back to your own soul. So can you just explain in a little more detail as to what Vanda Vadilepo means?
Okay, he refers to that in the final verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, which whenever I get there, we'll discuss that. He said the soul needs to go back the way it came, and then it will merge in you. That is where we have all come from. We means we as ego, where we have risen from. What is our pirapidam, as Bhagavan said? Pirapidam means birthplace. The birthplace or source of the mind is our being. That is, from where have we risen as this ego that is aware of itself as I am this body? It's only from our being, from the basic awareness I am. What shines through all the three states is I am. So ego appears only in waking and dream. What remains in sleep is only I am. So from where does ego rise? It arises only from I am. That means from our awareness, from our being, from Sat Chit. So the source from which we've risen is Sat Chit, the pure being awareness, which is what we actually are. Our own being, I am, that is the source of the mind. So when Bhagavan says, go back the way you came, that means turn your attention back to your own being, which is the source from which you've risen as ego. And that the means to subside back into the source is self-investigation. And as he says in verse 10 of Upadeshundya, Udita iritil odungi irital. That is, being having subsided in the place of rising, that is karma and yoga, that is bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. That is all these paths, the culmination of all of them is just to subside and to be as we actually are, to be in our being. Satbhava irital. That is being in Satbhava, the state of being in our own being. So our being is the source from which we've risen. So we need to go back to our being, we need to subside. To subside, we need to attend to our being. To the extent to which we attend to our being, we thereby subside into our being as our being. So that is what it means. It's a very, very beautiful teaching Bhagavan gave. That is, Bhagavan's words are very simple, but full of very, very deep, profound meaning. But though Bhagavan has told us that, are any of us going back to where we came from? No, we're still enthusiastically jumping out and experiencing this world and so interested in so many things other than ourselves. But slowly, slowly, by his grace, we need to practice what he's taught us and slowly, slowly, thereby cultivate the love to go back the way we came, to subside back into our source, and thereby to be as we actually are.
The next question is about surrender and bhakti. What advice or insights would Michael say about trying to surrender to consciousness by reminding oneself to rely, at least to some extent, on the power behind everything and not ego, as in, thy will be done? Some of my Christian friends tell me Jesus is their savior, and though they don't use the words surrender and bhakti, they make an effort to surrender and place their reliance on Jesus, something they consider greater than their ego or thinking mind. I ask as, on certain days, surrender seems more appropriate than investigating.
That is the aim of bhakti, is to give ourselves to God. So we begin at the initial stages of bhakti, we engage in puja, for example. We are worshipping God, or we do japa, we repeat a name of God, or we meditate on him, we do dhyana. In all these, we're giving our attention to God. But when we try to keep, it won't be so clearly noticeable if we're doing puja, because it's more gross action. It becomes more noticeable if we're doing japa. It becomes even more noticeable if we're doing dhyana. Though we're trying to give our attention to God, our attention is actually going here and there. We try and fix it on God, but other thoughts come, other cares and concerns and preoccupations in this world. So we find it, even to give our wholehearted attention to God, is not easy, because we want to attend, we want to think only of God, but so many other thoughts are coming in and interrupting. So where lies the problem? The problem lies in our will. Why we think of other things instead of thinking of God? Because of our likes and dislikes. So we have more likes and dislikes for things other than ourselves than we have love for God. As our love for God increases, we will be less and less concerned about other things and more satisfied thinking of God. So first we try to give our attention to God. Then we understand our will is the problem. So we want to surrender our will to God. So we give, surrender takes the form of trying to surrender our will to God. Thy will be done. Not my will, but your will. Your will is my happiness. I have no will of my own. That's our aim. But even that is not so easy to do because we still have strong likes and dislikes. But we slowly, we try to give up our own likes and dislikes and to accept that whatever happens, it is all the will of God. So this is all the progress on the path of bhakti or surrender. But however much we try to surrender our will to God, we can do so to some extent, but there's a limit to how much we can surrender our will to God. Because so long as we rise as ego, we will inevitably have likes and dislikes to a greater or lesser extent. So by the practice of devotion, our mind is purified. That means our Vishaya vasanas are weakened. So our likes and dislikes become less strong, but they still remain to a greater or lesser extent. So how to get rid of all these likes and dislikes, these Vishaya vasanas, or Vishaya vasanas are the seeds that rise as likes and dislikes and desires, attachments, and so on. In other words, the Vishaya vasanas are the inclinations that give rise to the likes and dislikes, which in turn give rise to the desires and attachments and hopes and fears and everything else. So how to surrender our will completely to God? It is impossible. So long as we remain as a jiva, so long as we continue to rise as ego, we can, to a great extent, we can surrender our will, but we cannot surrender it completely. Because it's the very nature of ego to have a will of its own. Ego, as Bhagavan says, it cannot come into existence, it cannot stand, and it cannot flourish without constantly grasping form. So as ego, we have a strong, the forms means the vishayas, the objects or phenomena. So as ego, it's the very nature, the vasanas are not ego. Ego is separate from the vasanas, but as ego, we have vasanas. We have strong inclination to attend to other things because our very survival depends on it. So we cannot surrender our will completely to God without surrendering ourself. Ourself means this ego. So how to surrender ego to God? For that we need Bhagavan's teaching, because Bhagavan has explained to us what is the nature of ego. Ego rises, stands, and ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without attending to things other than itself, that is, without grasping form. Why I say it in a negative way, we can't say ego comes into existence by grasping form, because it has to exist in order to grasp form. So it's better to say it cannot come into existence without grasping form. What he says in verse 25 of Ulunaptu is Urupatri Undam. That means grasping form, it comes into existence. That is, as soon as it comes into existence, it grasps form. So it cannot come into existence, it cannot stand, and it cannot flourish without constantly grasping form. Since such is the nature of ego, so long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are sustaining ego. Even if we are meditating with great love on a name or form of God, we still are there as ego in order to do so. So we are by meditating on a form of God, it's good. I'm not saying it's wrong to meditate on form of God. It's very good. It will purify the mind. But we are still maintaining that separation between ourselves and God, because the form of God is different from our form. So we have we've got the duality. We have a meditator. God is what is meditated on. So we've got the subject-object duality. So the nature of, since the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by grasping form, attending to anything other than ourselves cannot bring about the destruction of ego. So how to bring about the destruction of ego? Can we simply stop attending to all other things? Yeah, we can. Every night when we fall asleep, we're too tired to continue attending to other things, so we withdraw our attention from all other things and subside in sleep. But next morning we rise again, and along with us all our vasanas arise with us. That is, we are not making any spiritual progress by subsiding in sleep or in any other state of manolaya. Even Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, Bhagavan said, that will not destroy the vasanas. So however long you remain in Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when you rise again, just like when you rise from sleep, the mind will again wander under the sway of its vasanas. And for that he told the story of the yogi who was meditating on the banks of the Ganga and went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 300 years. And when he woke up, he angrily asked for the glass of water that he asked for before he went in. So that just to illustrate, manolaya, the temporary dissolution of mind, is not a solution. So how to bring about the permanent eradication of mind? It is necessary to withdraw our mind from all other things, but that is not sufficient. So in verse 16 of Upadeshundya, Bhagavan says, Veli videngale vittu, giving up the external vishayas. That means withdrawing our mind from all other things. In Sanskrit, he says, drisya varitam, keeping back the mind from all that is seen. But that's not the main thing. That's only an adverbial clause. That is necessary, but it's not sufficient. What is necessary is manam tan oli uru ordale, the mind knowing its own form of light. Chittam atmanaha chitva-darshanam, the mind seeing its own awareness. It means the same. It's just different ways of expressing it. The mind seeing the mind's form of light is the fundamental awareness I am. So the mind knowing that is unmay unachi. That is the real awareness. That is tattva darshanam. That is seeing the reality. So what is necessary is not. We cannot achieve it by attending to other things. We cannot even achieve it by ceasing to attend to other things. We can achieve it only by attending to ourselves. The nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to other things, but to subside by attending to itself. Therefore, how to surrender this ego? The answer is simple: attend to yourself. That's why in the 13th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan begins by giving a very beautiful definition of surrender. He says, Anma chintane tavira vera chintane kalambavataku satramidam kodamal atmanishta paranai iripade tanne isanuku alipadam. I'll take the main clause first and explain it. Atmanishta paranai iripade. Atmanishta paran means one who is firmly fixed as oneself. Atmanishta means being fixed as oneself, being oneself. So Atmanishta paran means one who is fixed as oneself. So being Atmanishta paran is giving oneself to God. Tanne isanuku alipadam. Literally it means is giving oneself to God. So how to be Atmanishta paran, how to be as we actually are. The means is given in the first clause, which is an adverbial clause, in which he says, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of oneself. It implies self-attentiveness. So what he implies is, we need to attend to ourselves so keenly, but we give no room to rising of any other thoughts. Because thoughts are thoughts about things other than ourselves. If we attend only to ourselves, there will be no, that is, all our attention is directed towards ourselves. There'll be no room for any thoughts to arise, because thoughts arise where? they arise in our awareness. If our whole awareness is focused on ourselves, there's no room for any thoughts to arise. So the implication of that sentence is being so keenly self-attentive, but we give no room to rising of other thoughts, and thereby subsiding and being as we actually are, that is giving ourselves to God. So Atma-vichara is that is, surrender is the ultimate aim of the path of bhakti, and the pinnacle of surrender is Atma-vichara. So people think, oh, this Atma-vichara, that is Jnana Marga. Bhakti Marga is something different. No, but the Jnana Marga, the path of self-investigation, Atma-vichara, is the culmination of the path of bhakti. So this is bhakti in its purest form. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 9 of Upadesha Undiyar, Bhava Balatinal, by the strength of meditation. He's referring to what he said in the previous verse, where he was talking about Ananya Bhava. Ananya Bhava means meditation on nothing other than oneself, with the understanding that God is what is shining as I. So if we understand that God is I, we should meditate on nothing other than I. And that, he says, is anatinam uttamam. That's best among all. That means it's best among all the practices of bhakti, best among all forms of meditation, is to meditate on nothing other than oneself. And then he goes on to say in verse 9, by the strength of that meditation, that is, by the strength of that self-attentiveness, being in Satbhava. Satbhava means the state of being as we actually are, which transcends bhavana, which is bhavanatita. Bhavanatita, in that context, bhavana means meditation in the form of mental activity, meditation on anything other than ourselves. So by the strength of self-attentiveness, we remain in our state of being, which transcends all mental activity, and that is parabhakti tattva. That is the very nature of supreme devotion. So this path of self-investigation that Bhagavan has taught us, this is the pinnacle of the path of surrender, which is the ultimate aim of the path of devotion. So this is the culmination of the path of devotion. This is the final step on the path of devotion. We can give ourselves to God only by investigating ourselves. Because when we investigate ourselves, we subside. Where do we subside? We subside back into our source. And what is our source? Our source is what is called God. That is Satchit. Is that a clear answer to that question?
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer.
Yeah.
Going to areas I didn't expect. Thank you.
Right. Well, I mean, surrender is so important. Surrender is the heart of Bhagavan's teachings. Bhagavan's teachings are all about surrender. And the means to surrender is self-investigation. So we need to have a very thorough understanding of this. So all the other practices of surrender that people do, all their puja, japa, dhyana, and all their trying to surrender their will to God, all these are good. These are all steps on the path, but all these steps lead ultimately to Atma-vichara. And you mentioned your friends, your Christian friends. What did Christ say? He says, they will say the kingdom of, look here, look there. The kingdom, but I say, look, see, the kingdom of God is within you. When he says, look, see, lo, is put lo, behold in the English of the time of King James, but what lo, behold means, look, lo means look, behold means see. So what Jesus said is, look, see, the kingdom of God is within you. So clearly he's saying, how do we look and see that the kingdom of God is within us? We have to look within.
is the love to go within, is because you said that so many times, I've heard you say that. Is that only cultivated by trying to turn within more and more, or is there anything else other than
Well, by
trying to stay
all
with
the other
yourself?
practices of bhakti, we are slowly weaning our mind off its desire and attachments for other things, because we're trying to cultivate love for God alone. So that purifies the mind. So that's how the process begins. But the purification, as I said, the impurities of the vasanas, to get rid of those vasanas, the vasanas are the seeds that give rise to all the likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. We can purify the mind to some extent by the worshipping God as if he was something other than ourselves, meditating on him or repeating his name or whatever. But ultimately the final stages of purification can be achieved only by Atma-vichara, because what is the root of all impurities? Whose vasanas are they? Whose desires? Whose likes and dislikes? They're mine. So this I, this me, my I, me, and mine, that is the real problem. So that is what we need to, that is the root that we need to cut. And the way to cut that root is by Atma-vichara. So ultimately, there are many ways to purify the mind, but the purification can be completed only by Atma-vichara, because only Atma-vichara will cut the root, namely ego.
Thank you. I think I saw Thy Will Be Done as some days your mind is so busy and so crazy that I felt it was one way to let go of that ego, to say my small ego can't sort this out.
If it's only some days, you're very fortunate. For most of us, it's every day, every moment of every day. This mind is so crazy. But so our aim is to give up our will, but we cannot give up our will entirely without giving up the I whose will it is. So this I is the root impurity. So to achieve the state that is that Thy will be done points to, only when ego is completely eradicated are we truly surrendered to the will of God. But as part of the process, it's very important not to allow our mind to be agitated by external things, to accept that whatever is happening, we say some things are good, some things are bad, but it's according to our likes and dislikes. We say some things are good. The things we like, they're good. We want a world with peace and with justice and with all these things, so we say these are good. We dislike a world in which there are wars, in which there's injustice, in which there's some people having far too much and some people not having enough. We dislike that. We say that's bad. But that's our little mind is having its likes and dislikes. Ultimately, if we accept that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving, whatever happens is what is ultimately good. Because he's all-knowing, nothing can be happening without his knowledge. Because he's all-powerful, nothing can happen without his consent. And because he's all-loving, he will not allow anything to happen that is not for the ultimate good of all concerned. So the truth is, they talk about the problem of evil. In whose eyes does evil exist? It's in the eye of the beholder. We say this is good, this is bad, this is evil, this person is a saint, this person is a sinner. That's our judgment according to our likes and dislikes. Ultimately, it's all his will. So under this whole world is ruled by his grace. And under the rule of his grace, nothing is wrong. Everything is as it should be. So we should be willing to accept everything, both the joys and the sorrows of life, both the justices and the injustices, both the wars and the peace, both the everything we need to accept. This is the will of God. Then only if we're willing to accept that will our minds subside and we'll be willing to surrender ourselves to him. So thy will be done is a very, very deep and crucial teaching. Bhagavan expresses it beautifully in the second verse of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. Ninishtam enishtam. Your will or your wish is my wish. Imbadaku, that is happiness for me. So whatever you want, that is my happiness. He says, addressing Aruṇācala. And in another verse in Aruṇācala Navamani Malai, he says, in verse 7, he says, whatever be your thought, do that. In other words, whatever be your intention, whatever be your wish, do that. Kaneyundran Karalinel, Cardal Peruke Tarubaye. Oh, beloved, just give me a flood of love for your feet.